The following is an interview I conducted with Wyatt Claypool of the National Telegraph. The interview was conducted in August of 2023. This is the first interview that I've ever conducted with anyone, so constructive feedback is welcome. At the same time, recognize I don't have a workflow for this. This is brand new to me. I don't necessarily anticipate this becoming a regular thing or a podcast or anything like that. However, it was fun, and I'm interested in increasing and developing my skills as an interviewer. Hopefully, you enjoy the conversation. All right. So, first off, who are you? What do you do, and what are you known for?
I'm Wyatt Claypool. I guess I'm a conservative news columnist, pundit, reporter, investigator, whatnot. I would do a lot of work on very many conservative campaigns, whether it's nominations, general election campaigns, that's federal, provincial, and even council-based. I guess I'm a sort of a jack of all trades when it comes to anything conservative. So I'll be a pseudo pundit, pseudo reporter, and pseudo polling analyst and stuff like that. But I'm kind of all over the place. And I think I'm best well known for the National Telegraph, which is the publication I run. Same with the YouTube channel, the National Telegraph. And I guess in terms of the National Telegraph, I think the biggest story I was known for was probably the stuff to do with AHS and ICU beds.
Okay. What is the elevator ride length version of your history with National Telegraph?
I got fired from the Post-Millennial for frankly being a better reporter than the people they had on staff. So I started a news publication of spite with 7 other guys, and that slowly willed down to just me and 2 other people over time.
Where did the name come from?
Well, originally it was the New Telegraph when we first launched with those 7 other people. And the problem was that there was a lot of personality conflicts. So then just a couple months after our first initial launch with the New Telegraph in late 2019 in December, we then rebranded to the National Telegraph to throw someone off the website because they controlled the server. And they wouldn't budge on a lot of random stuff we were doing. Nice guy, but it was just more so I think this just wasn't the right fit, wasn't the right kind of leadership model we were looking for. So then we started the the National Telegraph in early February of 2020, which was a strange year to start a news company.
At least you weren't ever in want of things to talk about.
Oh, definitely. It would have sucked to not be running a news publication when the lockdowns came into effect and you had nothing to think about doing.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Why should Albertans specifically and Canadians generally pay attention to the National Telegraph?
I think we do a good job of explaining politics as how it actually works rather than how we'd like it to work. You get a lot of YouTube channels and commentary pages where it's very, I guess what you would describe as constant political hype, that they're selling not really the detailed analysis of the story, they're selling the hype around the story. And we tend to cut through that. So our commentary is we're basically I guess this is a good way of putting it. We're neoconservatives. So we're conservatives, we're idealists, but we have strong prescriptions. So we see the world as it is. And then we kind of shape the idealism of our beliefs around that. And that influences the way we report, the way we analyze stories, and sort of brings everything down to a brass tacks level of what do we actually know and not just the kind of hyped up narratives we want to believe. Okay.
So would you say it's kind of pragmatics driven idealism or idealist driven pragmatics?
I guess it's we are pragmatists with idealist goals.
Okay. What are you doing that organizations like Rebel News or True North aren't doing, or they're not doing as well as National Telegraph?
Well, I'm never going to say I exactly do other things necessarily better than them. If I do anything better than them, it might be incidental, of course. And this isn't to denigrate their skill and ability. They just do have a lot more money than us. So in terms of money. Whether I do something better than them or not, it's hard to tell because I don't really have the budget to sort of practice all my sort of skills when it comes to media. But if I was to then boil down generally things we do a little bit better, it would be that I would say that we're less theme based. We're not going to have a show based around laughing at left-wing social media posts. We're not going to have a whole show about how we don't do Rebel News. I would say they're very much issue of the moment type of a publication, that they are very much not, I'm not trying to insult them in any way when I say that they're like an activist news organization. So if sort of men getting into women's sports is a big issue, that's the thing that they're doing. And a lot of their resources are poured onto it, which is kind of what they're doing right now. And then they kind of leave the everyday reporting and the commentary to being a little bit of a smaller part of their operations. True North, pretty much all about the commentary and then a little bit of the investigations, a lot of kind of op-eds and personality-based content, the Andrew Lawton show, Rupert Supramania show, Candace Malcolm's show, Harrison Faulkner, all these people, they're very much like the network. And I would say that with the National Telegraph, and again, this is more about the budget than anything, is that we are kind of the blog, and we literally are a blog site. We're kind of the blog version of conservative media. You're following mostly me and Daniel Boardman around, hearing our thoughts about things, hearing what we think is important. You're getting a very much a cluttered mess of what two people think about Canadian politics and what issues that we think people should be paying attention to. So we do slightly have the finger on the pulse of kind of what is important in Canadian politics, as well as we always have our finger on our own pulse to see what we care about.
Okay, cool. No, I like that. And I'm pretty sure Rebel actually openly states that they are like more activists with journalism or activist journalism.
And they own the Democracy Fund, so they've definitely gone into the sort of constitutionalist type stories. So they're finding stories where there is a constitutional kind of edge to them that can be sort of discussed.
Okay. Last question here before we leave the intro to Mr. Wyatt Claypool. I'd like to know about your faith and its importance in your journalism work. If it's important in your work, how does it direct what you say, how you say, and your motivations for saying it?
Well, definitely, I avoid ever swearing on Twitter and whatnot. If I can control the text of what I'm putting out, it's not that hard not to use 4-letter words on everything that you do. I wouldn't say necessarily that faith influences the journalism, not because it doesn't. It's more so I just talk about my politics in general, because it's more so that it goes from my faith to the politics to the journalism. It's kind of a bit of a funnel on what's affecting what. So I am a born-again Christian. I, repented of my sins, and it's covered by the blood of Jesus Christ. I believe in I don't want to go through an entire theological breakdown of what I believe. I'm a Grace Baptist, which is like a Baptist with a lot of Calvinist influences. So that's where a lot of my kind of neoconservative type ideals comes from. Because again, I'm not to get into what neoconservatism is, because people have a wrong idea of it a lot of the time. It's basically small domestic government politics, hawkish foreign policy, and a rejection of moral relativism. And that's where I'd say the faith-based part comes in. I am anti-moral relativist. I believe there is a singular truth, and that truth runs straight through the Bible. The Bible is basically the absolute truth for everything. And I believe that kind of influences the way I look at politics and the way I look at journalism, that there's not different takes. Of course, there's different times where we have different perspectives on an issue where no one knows what the exact facts around it are. But at the end of the day, I reject this. What's your truth? Speak your truth to me and stuff like that. And what's your perspective? It's not that socialists I just disagree with socialism. It's that socialism is wrong. Not that I have ultimate knowledge on terms of what politically is correct. If the Bible's true and God's an ultimate authority, obviously there is always going to be an ultimate truth to every subject, and we should always be digging for that when we don't know it.
Okay, cool. And that does actually help for probably when you're crafting an article about any kind of moral issue. You already have a base level stance of where you can agree, where you can't agree, those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't the best president ever, but it's kind of like what something that Teddy Roosevelt said, just along the lines of if you're not right, you're wrong. You're not just off, you're wrong. Not that you're not allowed to be wrong, not that you're a bad person if you're wrong, not that I'm not wrong sometimes, but if you're wrong, you're wrong. And I don't like this kind of bargaining. Well, no, actually, if you look at it from this angle, it could be, it's like, no, it's silly. It's like when you're talking about the carbon tax and people will really squint and try and figure out how actually technically it's made people better off. It's like, no, you're just wrong. We can just argue all day about how many things you can fit on the end of a pin or whatever, and how if you really look at it this way and you put it in this sort of light, then it's sort of like, no, there is an actual ultimate truth to every subject we're talking about.
All right, now let's get to the maybe not so easier questions. because you're not necessarily going to be talking about yourself now.
I hate talking about myself. That was actually the hard part.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Dude, ask me about any random dumb subject that, like, just ask me about movie special effects. I didn't take any media degrees in college or anything like that. I'll still talk about it for 7 hours as if I know what I'm talking about.
okay. That's actually a perfect segue, because in the opening crawl text of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, one of the opening lines is, "There are heroes on both sides. Evil is everywhere." The 2023 Alberta provincial election was unsurprisingly contentious. This was in large part due to the two primary parties in Alberta, the UCP and the NDP, completely drowning out any other competitors in media and public attention. Because of this, the vast majority of Albertans saw the election as a binary choice, and the party leaders obviously helped with that. So do you think that the concept of binary elections, only two choices, is an oversimplification of Alberta's political landscape?
I don't actually think it's an oversimplification, because there's a lot of theory behind the idea of, like, choice theory in politics, that at the end of the day, and this is where proportional representation is not all that people who advocate it think it is that when you have more and more options, like we do have, even though it's not proportional representation, of course, it's first past the post in Alberta, but just because you have more choices, just because there might be 18 registered parties and independents, does not actually mean that you have 18 choices. At the end of the day, everything is always going to get whittled down to one or two choices for everyone. People don't really look at the landscape and think of every single party as a separate option. They just think of what are real options. It's like, when, not to go too far into the weeds, but if there's some sort of plumbing issue in your house and you have two ways of fixing it, just because there's a third or fourth or fifth really fringe way of redoing the piping in your house entirely and gutting the house and trying to fix it back up, doesn't mean that's an actual option. It's whatever the two most realistic ones are the binary. And I think that it is good for people, especially who aren't used to politics, to think of things in binaries. Not always great if you know a lot about politics. And we could always just say, really, there is always the third option, to stay home, which is, I think, the option that most politicians are competing against. I don't think they're really ever competing against another party. It's more so, do people sit at home or not? But the binary does help people make sense of basically two competing worldviews, because never in any election do you have two parties fighting who are almost practically the same.
Yeah, even in this last election, there was previously was it the Alberta Party led by Stephen Mandel, and they were almost complete ghosts in this previous election, last election.
And I believe they were ghosts because in the last election, they didn't make sense to the binary that was going on. Is that, why am I a UCP voter, or maybe I get tired of the UCP? Why am I voting Alberta Party then? Not, you know what I mean, in the sense that if the UCP policies were bad, well, then I should shift all the way over to the NDP. If the NDP's policies are bad, why would I take one half step to the right and vote Alberta Party when I could just vote out like UCP? You know what I mean? It's like, really oftentimes it's like the issues are more government control of the economy or less. What's the point of saying, well, more is not the solution, more government control is not the solution, but I only want like 0.5% less in the Alberta Party. That's the problem, is that the voting Alberta Party proves too much in a certain sense. That if you're not voting UCP, you're not voting NDP, you're voting Alberta Party because they're different from the other party. But when you vote for the party that's even more different, it sounds like I'm almost being a little bit confusing, but you get my point, that if you're voting Alberta Party, it's probably because they disagree with one of the major parties on something. And if you agree with them that one party's wrong, like, oh, they want too much government, well, should you vote for the UCP because they are more on side with the smaller governments better? Whereas the Alberta Party was basically, it was giving you nothing. It was basically the idea, and I really don't like centrism because of this. The middle on every issue is not necessarily correct. Half the time you're just having the half bad solution. You just have half bad solutions. You never have any good solutions. That's I guess what I'm saying, to boil it down. I think this is why binary elections are actually quite good, because oftentimes it is either the big government solution or the small government solution. Pitching yourself as the party who's, sort of half big government, half not big government solution. It's like, well, what's the point of that option? It's just masquerading as a fake third choice.
So, but I guess there is always the third choice of, as you mentioned earlier, staying home. So maybe elections aren't really true binaries, but superficially they always boil down to it, like you were talking about.
Yeah, like the election is oftentimes just who's going to stay home and who's not going to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
Because very infrequently, it does happen. It does happen, especially with very skilled campaigners. You don't have that many moments where people just go from, NDP to federal conservative or something like that, or they go from liberal to green, or they go from green to PPC. It doesn't really happen. Mm-hmm. It's really how many people who usually don't think it's worth it to show up, or how many people who might think it's not worth it to show up, did you convert over and get to actually show up, or mm-hmm. people who are on the fence. All elections are pretty much about people on the fence and people who aren't going to show up. Now, red Tories often take that the wrong way, and they say, well, people are on the fence, ergo we should act again like the Alberta Party, and we should sit on the fence with them and make no decisive choices on any policies. It's like, no. People want to get off the fence eventually. They just don't know which side to jump on. No one just wants to be on the fence party where we just sort of sit back and we devise muddled policies that are self-defeating because they want to balance two completely opposing interest groups, that being government and private business or families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oftentimes it's kind of the law of non-contradiction is in people's minds, even if they don't know how to properly articulate it. Two separate things that are offering contrasting views of truth cannot both be equally true.
You can even say that this is even the problem whenever there is a party further right or further left than a major party. Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of the issue with the Greens and the NDP relative to the Liberals, as well as the problem with the Christian Heritage Party and the PPC relative to the Conservatives. Because the problem is that the criticism of them is that they're not small enough government parties, or they're not enough family value parties, or on the left, it's like they're not, they're not pro-union enough, or they're not pro-government services enough in terms of the Green Party. The Liberals are not anti-Semitic enough, or something like that. But the problem is that then you're having to admit that 80% of their agenda is actually quite good, but they just don't have that extra 20%. The PPC would never look at the Conservative and say they have it 80% wrong, or anyone who says that, I think, is frankly being dishonest. Right. This isn't me trying to go on an anti-PPC diatribe, because I'd say in Ontario, the New Blue Party definitely has a reason to exist, because their opinions relative to the Ford PCs are on a binary. Right. It's, do you think that the government should be having to subsidize the EV industry to get it off the ground? Or do you think that if EVs aren't ready, that we shouldn't be giving them money to waste on cars nobody wants? So when you actually go there actually is a binary. It's not just a party trying to outflank someone a little bit more to the right. That's where I find stuff just gets a little bit absurd. Both people who move a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right of a current party pretending that that's somehow creating a new formula.
So here's an interesting question for you. I mentioned the Star Wars quote at the beginning. Going back to that, who would you say were the heroes on both sides of the election? Who would the UCP and NDP each prop up as a hero?
Heroes? The funny thing is, like, for the UCP, because of course the answer is always potentially going to be, it's the party leader, right? It's whatever. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you mean by the question. Are you talking about politicians or people?
Who would Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith each say, these are heroes of our side, the other side's evil, here are the heroes that we're presenting to champion for you?
The UCP made really good use of individuals like Rebecca Schultz and Dimitrios Nicolaides. Nicolaides had that very good commercial about his parents coming from, or I think was it him himself who came over? But anyways, I think his family came over from Greece, or I think Cyprus, and they moved to Alberta and getting started and whatnot. And they really used kind of that family's immigrant story to kind of promote the idea of why Alberta's special. And he was kind of the guy who, fought hard, became an MLA, whatnot. Now he's like the minister of whatever. So he was post-secondary at the time. Now he's the minister of education, but they kind of gave that hero story to him in order to reflect a lot of the immigrant community as well as established Albertans, because he kind of was able to fold both of those identities into one, both being a family of immigrants as well as being kind of a guy you would say is unmistakably kind of Albertan in the way he thinks about issues and whatnot. And then Rebecca Schultz is kind of like the creation. I'd say she's much more of a modern politics hero, in the sense that the young woman who gets into politics, has a family, kind of that self-made kind of woman, because I feel like that's, in a certain sense, I'm almost saying this a little bit ironically, because I feel like it's become a bit of a stale hero narrative already, that it's pretending that's a little bit too novel for women to be in politics. That's who I think the UCP was kind of sort of using as their sort of heroes in the party. Whereas I think I think kind of like what it would have been smarter for them to do, and this is where I think they didn't do as well, is I would have promoted people who had stories that were more centered around their values and how their values are the values of Alberta and how those values have created this province, where I found the hero narratives they were spinning were very commerce-based. It was very individual achievement-based, disconnected from what this person believes in their heart in terms of the values that they bring to their family and to their workplace. You know, even though Demetrios, I think, there was still a good story to highlight, I think there was a little bit of another angle they could have had, especially with some of their rural MLAs, when it comes to what they believe on sort of socially in a certain sense.
So in a binary choice election, as we've been talking about, voters can often be left with the choice of the devil you know or the devil you don't want to know. In this case, how the majority of the UCP handled the issues of 2020 through 2022 is what descended many UCP MLAs into the so-called devil status. Many Albertans were forced to choose between incumbent MLAs that introduced harmful and destructive policies during 2020 through 2022, or for NDP challengers whose policies are virtually guaranteed to be ruinous for the province. For UCP MLAs who lost seats to the NDP, apart from giving up their seat to new UCP hopefuls, could they have done anything to retain their seat? Or was the writing on the wall from the beginning?
I think, and this is kind of what I've heard, is with a lot of the MLAs who lost, it wasn't necessarily their fault, because I think, of course, like any election, there's a lot of stuff going on. But if you were to lay anything to blame on their behalf, it would be the idea that, and it was a little bit because of the pandemic, is that because there wasn't really that much time after the 2019 election for them to really get to know their constituents and have that sort of connection with people, that made it for politicians who are predisposed to be a little bit more cowardly on issues that the media says that they have to vote and advocate certain way on, is that they were disconnected from their constituents. So I didn't think that they were able to feel that heat from constituents the same way they would have if they were a two-term MLA who had already been interacting with their community for 6 years. And then when they know those 10 people who usually write them nice letters start to say, what are you doing? That I think would have jarred people a little bit. I think that they were a little bit gun shy going into the pandemic, because there wasn't a lot, because they hadn't really, I guess they hadn't really gotten their sea legs for political controversy yet. And their first instinct was to freeze like a deer in the headlights on a lot of these issues. So I never say it's because they're evil, they want to lock everyone up because they're like goblins or something. At the same time, I think it's just because they didn't identify closely enough with the concerns of their constituents yet. And it's hard to feel the heat from the constituents when you're on Zoom all day for meetings, and you can maybe take a telephone call once in a while. You don't have people walking around to your office and saying, hey, can you justify why we need these lockdowns still? Show me on paper where this makes any sense at all. And so I think especially after the pandemic cleared, because they immediately went to election mode, they never got that warmth with their constituents. They never really were able to see eye to eye. So I think there was a lot of people who actually probably didn't even care that much about the lockdown measures. Maybe they even supported them. They didn't show up for the UCP, not because they weren't hard enough on the lockdowns or anything like that. It's just that they don't identify with their MLA at all, because it was someone who they only knew that was like they only maybe sent a letter to or something like that. Or they probably didn't even send a letter. They probably just knew their MLA was this person. They never saw them at an event prior to the election.
I appreciate that take, because I definitely don't have that same perspective. So it's good to challenge me.
To be fair, I'm being a little bit of a devil's advocate.
Okay.
I'm kind of trying to get into their headspace. I don't understand it in the sense that if I know I'm doing something wrong and I'm hurting people and we have stats to even prove it, eventually it is your responsibility to stand up. So I'm thinking of it from the most pragmatic political perspective, that they never got to really get to know their constituents. So ergo, they didn't feel the pressure. At the same time, as someone who is as socially strange as I am, even I can kind of understand if a policy is hurting people and that maybe we should reverse course. Which is why, like a lot of people, I was okay with the lockdown measures when they first started. And within a couple of months, I got very tired of them and was wondering when they were actually going to justify it. So from there, I think it is fully their fault for having voted and gone along with that stuff. At the same time, I'm thinking from a very moderate voter's perspective of why some of these people like Chandra went down to defeat.
No, I do appreciate that, because sometimes, as you know, the things that happen with Grace Life, it's sometimes a little bit hard to pry myself into another perspective where I can see like a steelman case for some of these guys.
Yeah. And my church also, because we just rent a community center, Foundation Baptist in Calgary, we rent a community center space. So our ability to object to things was extremely diminished, because it's not like, well, we'll stand up to the man. It's like, well, we can't really just break into someone else's property that we rent and then keep doing church there. Yeah, we actually did do church outside a lot of the time when we weren't allowed in the space. But even then, it's like, well, with a church with a lot of significantly older members, do we really want the police arresting people and not? So you had to walk a fine line where you're going to get any people in trouble, especially people who, might not be able to afford to lose their jobs, in the sense that you got to think of families first, although we did meet as much as humanly possible at the same time.
So would you say that there's any UCP MLAs who should have been given another chance just based on the merits of their campaign?
Whitney Isaac, very much so. Whitney Isaac and Miranda Rose. And I think that both of them were very community-oriented people. They were very engaged. I knew that they did not like the measures. I think and a lot of these MLAs, people don't realize they did voice concerns in caucus, maybe not loudly enough. I do think those two are the types of people, if they were MLAs today, would be making a lot of positive differences, especially Miranda Rose in terms of life issues. I think she was one of the few MLAs who actually answered the CLC's survey on life issues, and she is solidly pro-life. And Whitney Isaac, I don't really know as much of her perspective on certain social issues and fiscal issues. At the same time, I think Isaac was one of those people where, especially even just following her on social media, she was the person who was there to help out community associations, help individual constituents very much day to day as much as she possibly could. So I think that she's definitely someone who's very much a service oriented politician. And like to use a counterexample, unlike Shandro, who, even though I think he got smeared a couple of times in terms of that doctor who sued him and tried to get his law license taken away from him. That was nonsense. I think that he got a bad rap on some of those things. At the same time, Tyler never did himself any favors. He's kind of the perfect party functionary. If you tell him to do something, he's going to do it. He's never going to really stand up to party leadership. So he ended up shooting himself in the foot a lot in terms of stuff like that. At the same time, he's the sort of guy who doesn't really show up in the district that of the riding. He lives in the riding, but it's pretty much drives into the riding, garage door up, garage door down.
Right. Maybe using Chandra as an example, or anyone else you can think of, were there any UCP incumbents that lost their seats that voters should have just held their nose and voted for them, even though they weren't the best?
Devinder Tour, definitely in Calgary, Falconridge. He got replaced by Parmeet Singh Bopari. I'm not even trying to be facetious or slander him in any way or like hyperbolize. He's an actual Khalistani, a radical Sikh separatist. I've talked to many people in the Sikh community, many of them who live in Falconridge, and they are quite disgusted whenever people are attacked for bringing that up about Parmeet, who pretends as if you're weird that for thinking that it's weird for Sikh people to be Khalistanis. The vast majority of Sikh people are not Khalistanis, but the Khalistanis in that movement pretend as if somehow being anti-Khalistanis, being anti-Sikh, when it's really just theocratic separatism. It's very difficult to explain the Khalistani movement. If you were to throw a graphic up on screen, maybe it would be it's a violent anti-Hindu movement. It's backed by the Pakistani government in the Punjab region to have the Punjab region separate and become a theocratic Sikh state called Khalistan. It's very strange that this is a big part. Not a big part in terms of a lot of people buy into it, but there's a significant minority of Sikhs who are pro-Khalistani and who will vote for politicians who are Khalistanis. And I don't doubt that that's how Parmeet Singh ended up becoming powerful in his district, because he probably has a dedicated, dense fan base of people who are willing to push him over the top. And I think Devinder Tour, who is definitely not a Khalistani, would have still been much healthier for northeastern Calgary politics.
You wrote an article on the Khalistani perspective, didn't you?
Yeah, I did cover in terms of what Parmeet Singh believes, his Facebook page, his pro-Khalistani posts, like him sharing videos with guys with AK-47s and RPGs in it, whatnot. The funny thing is you can never get the legacy media take this stuff seriously. Think about, dude, like the Jennifer Johnston thing, that was nonsense. That was a nonsense scandal. Did she say something that was rude? Sure. At the same time, anyone can figure out what she actually meant by it. She means it in the sense that it would be bad if 3% of the kids in my class were depressed, or 3% of kids in my class were anorexic, or 3% of kids in my class felt alienated from their other classmates.
Mhm.
That's what she's saying, that when there's people in distress, when there's people not feeling quite right, that we want, that you don't just say, well, it's only 3% of the classroom. That was her point.
Do you think she'll ever get invited into caucus or no?
I heard she is desperately trying, which is a little disappointing to me. I'd rather her stick to what she believes and work her way into the caucus by doing a lot of good advocacy work, rather than what I've heard her strategy is to shut up and hopefully she gets added back in.
Okay, yeah, because I think she's the only independent right now.
Yeah, she is.
Did you see any innovative or especially effective tactics used by the UCP during this campaign?
I'm going to give Randy Kerr, the campaign manager for Nicholas Milliken, a lot of credit, because those signs that came up with that the NDP were putting up. He was the one who came up with the little sign tactic. I heard that the party didn't even really want to give it a shot, so he printed up his own signs to basically prove the tactic worked. It's not the ones that you remember, because the UCP later matched the colors so they looked like the NDP signs. His were like yellow and blue or whatever, but it still worked, and he proved his point. I think that was probably one of the best tactical moves during the entire election.
Okay.
And that was really smart, because people like funny tactics. It's like it's like the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals. A good tactic is one that your base enjoys, and that was definitely an enjoyable one for conservatives, because it adds the levity back into conservative politics. This is where, as dumb as it is, the "We're Not Your Daddy's PC Party" was a great slogan from Alison Redford. It's stupid for real conservatives because we know what that cringe actually means. At the same time, it gives her some levity, a lady who does not exactly, her name does not exactly make you think of levity. When you hear it.
I don't remember much about Alison Redford except for how terrible she was.
She feels like a PowerPoint presentation where the only colors are gray.
Yeah, exactly. Can you think of any face palming moments you saw from either side, the UCP or the NDP? The
NDP the biggest thing is the NDP announcing the corporate tax increase. The dumbest thing ever. I am anti-NDP all day long. I help to stop the NDP pack. I'm obviously not pro-NDP. At the same time, it makes me want to tear my hair out and act homicidal every single time I see political campaigns doing the dumbest possible thing. I'm looking at Rachel Notley. I'm just like, lie better. Just lie better. Just expose the corporate tax increase after you win. Goodness. And a lot of the NDP stuff building up Danielle Smith as this far right figure was so dumb. It was the worst possible messaging that they could have gone with, was that Danielle Smith's far right, she's radical. You don't know what she's going to do, because as soon as Rachel Notley walked out into that debate stage dressed up in blue, and Danielle Smith was not crazy, then they immediately folded. At the same time, I would say that for the UCP, a lot of their bad moves were kind of from the opposite point of view, where it wasn't their attacks on the NDP that were bad, it was their lack of attacks that made me. It was like a slow motion facepalm when I have all these articles on Calistanis, on Rosamond Valencia, who was the NDP opponent to Peter Singh in Calgary East, associating with anti-Semitic groups. At the same time, he's calling Albertans racist and stuff like that. All of these just terrible candidates, all the communist candidates and whatnot. You'd have the UCP War Room account on Twitter maybe tweet some of the stuff out, but they weren't ever going for the jugular, because they had the idea that if we're nice enough, we'll win. It's like, well, the NDP is spinning the narrative that you guys are deeply mean and awful, and you guys saying nothing's not going to help that perception. So you better actually start laying down some haymakers, or this election is going to be way closer than you think, which it absolutely was. The moments when the UCP were talking about Bill 6 or whatever, it was the Rural Farmers Bill, where they were trying to prevent kids from working on their family farms. The moments like that, the new arena deal, a lot of stuff where you're just like, lady, like Danielle, you're the libertarian leader. Just go stick to that. Be the fiscally conservative one. You realize that Ralph Klein wasn't losing elections because of his fiscal responsibility. It's an asset to you. And again, like a lot of other slow-moving facepalms, where she gets Danielle Smith becomes the leader of the party and the premier of Alberta, and then just slow motion nothing really going on for the first 4 or 5 months of her leadership. And then she proposes like the arena deal and a bunch of other stuff. And then they start cracking down on crime like 2 months before the election. I'm like, day of you become the leader, even before you're the official premier, when you win your seat, you just got to push really hard to start getting things done. Show people you can get things done. Don't run on the idea you're going to get things done. Get the things done and then run on the things you got done. Even if you proposed a bill that wasn't able to get passed before the actual election started, just propose it. Just show that you're serious. That's where it drove me up the wall. Like 2 weeks of the election left. That's when we come out and we say, hey guys, we might lower your income tax by 3%. You don't have the bandwidth to actually tell people that you're preparing to lower the taxes 2 weeks out of an election. You got to be saying that for 5 months. You got to have already proposed the tax cut. And I got the excuse from inside the party when I asked people about this. They're like, oh, well, it might have thrown off our budget plan. Just say you're going to do another budget plan and balance it after the election. But for now, we're going to make sure that people get more money in their pockets. Just say it like that it doesn't matter. We'll find there is waste in this government and we're going to find it. And like stuff like that. It was so stupid. The NDP had more of the face palms. The UCP just had the things that were making you like lie comatose in your chair, just wondering who's putting all this stuff out or who's not taking action on these issues.
You brought it up, the Rachel Notley coming out with the blue sweater at the debate. I actually had a friend of mine today ask me to ask you about that. Was that like a deliberate thing, or was that an accident, or what was that about?
If a leader shows up to a debate, unless they have a big gash on their face from a knife fight, their entire appearance is deliberate. There's not something that they haven't thought of. It's like in presidential elections in the US, although a lot more money is put into the prep, but like they will debate fake people, like people that their campaigns hire who look like the candidate who can debate well. They pick the colors in their tie to signal certain things about themselves and whatnot. Like 100%. And even Danielle Smith, people overlooked this because they were so blown away by how brazen it was for Notley to be wearing the blue suit. And I know that she shouldn't be wearing an orange suit because that makes her seem like the most square 90s, early 2000s female NDP leader when they would wear like the orange pantsuits, and it was awful. And you could tell that they probably were not the leader that the party had confidence in, but they were probably the ones who, had the most seniority because it's a very union-based party, especially back then. But like in all that, I think Rachel Notley should have worn like a yellow suit or something that was like a soft blue. That would have been far smarter, like a baby blue suit, or just tone it down a lot. Maybe wear red, do something like that. Who knows? Gray.
I do think that there were some heroes in the election. I don't want to point out, for example, Todd Loewen. During much of his campaign time, Todd was tasked with overseeing the provincial wildfire fighting efforts. As a side note, I would recommend it would be good if you ever have the opportunity to talk to Todd and his team about some of the issues that they dealt with. I think there's a good story there. I wouldn't
doubt it. I kind of overlooked the whole wildfire thing. Man, that was if we actually have to go back to the face palming part, was the worst part. Was the NDP, some of the candidates literally belittling the wildfire issue by trying to mock the UCP. This is what it's like under the UCP while people's homes burn down. It's like, oh, shut up.
Yeah,
it was
that was pretty brutal.
Like that guy the guy in Red Deer South or whatever, like what a tool.
But yeah, if you do have opportunities to talk to Todd and his team about that, some of the issues there, I think you might find them to be very interesting stories.
I did hear about him having to put some fires out, not specifically him. I just knew that there were certain people higher up in the party having to clean up some of the messes by some of their not like their MLA nominee candidates, where they were not dealing with the wildfires properly, and basically some of the executives had to reorganize them to get them to like at least pretend to be local heroes.
There's a little bit more than that. I would definitely recommend you reach out if you ever get the chance. But one thing that impressed me about Loewen, and one of the reasons why I want to highlight him, is that he publicly announced he was suspending his campaign activities on May 6th. So we're talking like 3 weeks before the actual election. And it was only after he seemed to be satisfied with the firefighting efforts, with about 4 days before the election, that he re-entered campaign mode. And yet, despite that, with very few days of actual campaign time, he won his constituency with over 75% of the vote. And if we contrast that with guys like Casey Madhu and Tyler Shandro and their frankly embarrassing defeats, despite seemingly large and loud campaign presence for at least 3 weeks straight. It paints a pretty vivid picture. What do you think guys like Todd Loewen have that candidates like Shandro and Madhu did not have during that campaign?
To boil it down to one word, he had grit. They didn't have. They feel soft-handed in comparison, especially in the case of Casey Madhu. And I've talked to him before, decently nice guy. The problem is, as a Casey Madhu, you have to know, as the one UCP MLA in Edmonton City proper, dude, all the UCP candidates in that city who aren't you, all they're doing is running, knowing they're going to lose, to hopefully prop you up a little bit by making some noise for the UCP in Edmonton. And you do not take that for granted. Not that he didn't try during the election, but this is the problem with a lot of UCP campaigns. They only started seriously campaigning when the writ was dropped. You need to be campaigning a year in advance. You need to be getting back out at the doors saying, hey, I know I didn't always make the right choices. I know I didn't always do the right thing. I'd like to hear from you what you want. And that just didn't happen. You can't, and this is something hopefully I'm not revealing too much about the way campaigns work in the UCP, I was on I was doing a lot of volunteering for a lot of MLAs, so this doesn't expose anyone. Man, they have to stop just doing voter ID at the doors. It's painful. It's so disconnected from people, and this does go to the issue with Shandro and Isik and Casey Madhu, because again, Isik was actually kind of involved in her community. She actually did a decent job of being somewhat present. The problem was, as soon as they go to the doors, they're saying, "Hey, how's it going? Who are you voting for? Oh, us? Okay." And then they walk away. Or, "Oh, not us? Oh, okay. Oh, you don't know yet? Oh, okay." And then they walk away. I'm like, just talk to them. Talk to them for 10 minutes. Every single one of those races in Calgary that we lost, if they just focused from day one on, we want 500 conversions by the end of these 4 weeks. And what I mean by conversions is that we want to go to that door and take someone who was probably going to stay home or was going to vote NDP, and we want to get them voting UCP. If we can get 500 of those tallied up, that this person was going to do something other than vote for us, then that's what you're trying to do. Not just someone like, and we're talking about verbal confirmations at the door that, oh, that actually made me think differently about it. I personally probably got like 60 or 70 conversions at doors during the campaign, and I didn't do that much door knocking. But you have to sort of go the distance with people at the door. You don't just sort of say hi, bye, and then hopefully you vote for us. You like actually got to talk to the person for 15 minutes and make yourself seem like a human being, where the UCP was sort of looking at people, and no doubt the NDP also did this during the election. The campaigns do this all the time. They look at people as votes, and they do not look at them as actual people.
Yeah.
And I'm not even just saying this in sort of a touchy-feely way, like treat the people like they're humans. Right. I'm saying treat the people like they might donate to you after this election if you're nice enough. Do that. Like, be selfish. Just be more selfish. Talk to this person because you're selfish. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay to have goals, and it's okay to want your goals to come to pass, which is what they should have been doing, is saying, hey, I want to make this conversion. So what do I need to do to make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the problem with efficient campaign tactics are efficient, but they're also not effective. That's the problem, is that, maybe you identified an extra couple voters, but identifying a voter doesn't mean anything. It just means that someone who's already going to vote for you is probably a little bit more likely to show up because you identified them and you'll call them back on the voting day. You want to find the people who are hard cases. I walked up to the doors who previous volunteers had said were negative. They're 100% voting NDP, and they were voting UCP by the time we walked away from the door. And it's not because I'm a wizard. It's because you talk to them long enough, you find out they have a couple misconceptions, and you can correct them being very polite.
Fair point. And that's just good general life advice in communication.
Yeah.
For any UCP MLAs who barely beat their NDP opponents, what advice would you want to offer them in their role as a barely elected official?
Barely elected officials. Hopefully it doesn't sound like I'm just going back to campaigning again. You got to use social media properly. Use social media properly. Keep people aware of what you're doing. People are not going to read your month or your biannual updates from the legislature on what you've done for them, because it's just full of generic gunk. You want to have 1,000, 2,000 people in your area following you, not just 2,000 followers on your page, because that's the problem with a lot of MLAs, is that they just have followers from outside their district of interested people who are following them. Like Prasad Panda lost despite having like 30,000 people following him, because it was just all the Wild Rose and PC interns following him from outside the district because they were interested in the by-election he got elected in. But you get some of these people like up in the Northeast, especially, where they're very dense districts where social media would help immensely because you don't need to cover that much territory with it. It's a very easy little 1 kilometer square area to target. And it's like they only have 500 followers. It's like, and again, it's not the followers that matter. It's what matters is that small number represents not very many people who know what you do day to day. Yeah, that's what people have to think of. That people do not read the newspaper and find out all the articles, and don't read all the articles you were quoted in. You got to push that stuff on to people. And then other than that, it's like, I'd say with a lot of barely elected people, is like make an impact. And I even say this to the people who were elected by wide margins, especially rural MLAs. A lot of the times you get a lot of rural MLAs who fade into the background because they don't really have to do anything to justify getting reelected. It's like, just take stands on stuff. The left, all they do all day long is take stands on issues. A lot of them stupid issues that a lot of people don't support them on, but they take stands so their base stays strong. When you don't take any stands, you lose your base, and all you have is maybe some reluctant conservatives come out to vote for you next time because, hey, I don't like the NDP. So you got to give people a lot of reasons of why you're better than just a generic UCP party functionary.
I like that idea of taking stands, because for a lot of people, that was part of the issue over the last few years, is that it seems like it was easy for MLAs to take stands for Jason Kenney, but not easy for them to take stands for constituents.
Look at Premier Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick. The guy was the most disliked premier in the entire country, and now he's effectively staved off a leadership review challenge. It's still technically pending. I think that his opponents have until the 15th to gather another 20 or 30 letters to have a leadership review. And even at this point, even if they get that through, they've been so thoroughly embarrassed by the lack of momentum they have, because Blaine Higgs is frankly popular on his changes with Policy 713, regulating the way gender identity and sexual orientation is dealt with in classrooms and whatnot, that nobody can touch him. I guarantee within a year he'll be one of the middle of the pack premiers for popularity, and he might rise faster after that. That you can dig yourself out of a hole by taking stances on issues that the media say are controversial. And the media basically just say that any social issue is controversial. When you have 90% of people on your side, you're not controversial. But those who oppose you are controversial. And people have to understand that more as well. When you are standing on the right issues and for the right values, you're most likely going to have the majority of people gravitate to what you believe. And from that perspective, you are not controversial. The media is controversial. The left is being controversial, and they're attacking people for their values. They're being contentious. They want to overthrow what the values that work in this country because they have some sort of stupid woke ideology that governs the way they think about things, which is an anti-objective ideology.
As a quick side anecdote regarding social media presence and things like that for the MLAs, I don't know how familiar you are with the campaign that Rod Sherman put on as an opponent to Rocky Pancholi.
Yeah, I noticed that his social media was oddly comatose for like the budget he had. And I'm not even kidding. I offered to do almost every single person's social media and help them run ads. I think the only UCP campaign that ran really good ads that I wasn't doing the ads for was Chantal DeJong's campaign. I advised them a little bit, and her campaign manager ended up doing a really, really good job with running them and micro-targeting them and making sure to grow the page. They weren't really running ads to grow the page as much as just get information out about the election, but that was good. They actually did good micro-targeting. So many campaigns, like it was like Miranda Rosen's campaign. I was seeing our ads in downtown Calgary half the time. And the thing is that the mobile media, the organization she hired, and it's not her fault. At the end of the day, MLA candidates do not have the time of day to really care deeply about who's running their ads. They just want someone to do it. The ads had way too much text on them. It didn't even show what party she was a part of when they were running them. And her name was tiny on it, and even her image was tiny on it. All my ads were like big shot of the candidate, big thing of their name, keep whatever writing this is blue, big UCP logo, and it's like a really good headshot of them, really. And then I had the background tailored to where they are. Either it's the background of the city of Calgary, city of Edmonton, or a rural area with wheat and stuff like that. Or in terms of Miranda Rosen, the sample I made her out has like a really nice view of Banff. Like,
Okay.
perfect. It's like people don't understand how to make ads. The people have this stupid philosophy to social media that if you create a page and you post things on it, well, the world, people are going to be jumping out of garbage cans. They're going to be like coming up from the sewers and like, smashing through windows trying to get to some sort of like media portal that they can log on and look at your new page. Like, people do not care about your page. You have to make them care about your page. The people are not like, like hungry for social media content about politics. Well, people are, but like they're not hungry for this brand of social media posting where it's just the MLA saying, I was in this town today talking to these people about issues. It's like, you got to be really smart with the way you operate a social media page to make it a real hub for people to show up to. Like, even though I disagree with the way that she looks at a lot of issues, you can never take away from Michelle Rempel that she's fantastic at social media. There's a reason why she has 350,000 people who follow her on Facebook. It's because she's engaged and she makes it its own unique forum, not just something that posts photos from events a week after they happened.
So were you responsible for Raj Sherman's infamous dog email?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't on that campaign. They said they didn't want me, so I am fully divest. I helped Luke Scavento out in Beverly Clairview, but I didn't get to help. I didn't get to help anyone else in Edmonton.
So, do you know what I'm talking about? The dog email?
I actually have no idea.
Oh, okay, I'll forward it to you after. Weird
rigging that you saying the dog email. Like, there's something inside my brain that I don't know what it is that sounds familiar, and I might have repressed it.
I'll send it to you after. It was an extremely cringy email where you had a dog who was speaking in the first person about how their mom, being the person who owned the dog, was so excited to vote for Raj Sherman because the dog saying, I can tell he's a good man, and da-da-da. It was extremely cringy.
That's so weird. Did they use the word fur baby in the email? Because that's the only thing that could make it worse.
I don't think so. No, thankfully they didn't go that far, but I'll send it to you after.
That's a capital offense to say fur baby.
It was pretty bad. And then a week later, Rod Sherman was putting out emails saying, we have to have an emergency campaign support meeting, blah, blah, blah. So hopefully it had something to do with stupid dog email.
Oh, people don't know how to connect with voters. It's weird. The thing is, I am not a super social person, so I have a very difficult time connecting with people sometimes and being able to see eye to eye with people. But it's just like, dude, just talk about issues. Just talk about issues because people can understand issues. Talk to people like they are smart enough to understand what's going on, even if they might not actually understand. Because at the end of the day, people like to vote for the person that they think they understand the best. I mean,
I want to switch really quickly to the big picture of the whole UCP campaign. Do you think that the UCP sufficiently addressed major concerns from their support base regarding campaign promises?
No. I think that the UCP did not win this election. It was Rachel Notley who failed to win. Right. And I think a lot of the issues came from the fact that the UCP seemed to abandon not only a lot of the promises that Kenny had made from back in the day, but when Danielle Smith became premier, it seemed like she genericized herself to the point where it is really difficult to say why the Danielle Smith brand of the UCP deserves your vote. It just became the UCP color blue better than color orange. That was kind of the election. From the UCP's perspective, where the NDP had the far better narrative going into that election, even though it was based on a lot of falsehoods. And then the NDP at the end of the election just decided to lose with a corporate tax announcement, with a lot of their crappy ads, with a lot of their demonization of Danielle Smith to the point where a lot of voters got tired of it. It was all in the control of the NDP, and they just decided to wipe out at the end. The NDP are great campaigners because a lot of their party base is activists, and activists have experience doing this. Yeah. At the same time, activists do not know their audience half the time. So they were really good going into the election. And again, this isn't a comment on their ideology. I find the way that they see the world to be silly. At the same time, that because they went into the race good, and then they just started tripping over themselves because it was To compare it to something, not that this is exactly how it was kind of like James Comey announcing an investigation to Hillary Clinton a week before the 2016 presidential race.
I remember that.
In the sense that the motivation behind that was not Comey trying to hurt Hillary. He was thinking, she's got this, she's going to win, so I'm going to basically announce this so that there's no haze over her presidency as she goes in, because we'll investigate this. We'll quickly say maybe a couple weeks after she wins that there was nothing there, and then we'll move on. The NDP wanted to basically get all of their big promises that maybe people wouldn't like announced before the election, so nobody would accuse them of being liars. But what they failed to realize was the only reason they were ever ahead at the start of the election was because they were lying really well.
Everything is stupid and nothing makes sense is a mantra that I've been using quite a lot over the last few years.
It is what it is.
Over the last couple of years, Albertans saw a swift rise in social media activism. Many pages and groups popped up as either outlets for frustration, safe havens for expressing shared views and values, or rallying points for planning and organizing events and protests. One such group is their Facebook group called Holding MLAs Accountable, originally created and sustained by a Mr. Jordan Cossack. As of today, this page has nearly 23,000 members. I suspect that this specific group, Holding MLAs Accountable, may have been a bit of a thorn in the side of some absentee, apathetic, or hypocritical MLAs during the age of Rona. So what's your take on the impact of Holding MLAs Accountable in specific as related to Albertan politics? And what about similarly minded groups and pages in general? Positive, negative impact?
Yeah, like the other ones I was associated with was like the Angry Albertans kind of Telegram groups and Facebook page, stuff like that. Those two, the Holding MLAs Accountable and the Angry Albertan, I think those two were the groups that really did the most actual legwork in getting stuff done. Because like you mentioned, a lot of these groups are based around people who are frustrated individuals who are mad at their absentee MLAs, and oftentimes perfectly legitimately mad at them. The problem is that being frustrated isn't the skill, and a lot of these groups tended to not really get much done. You know, they do a lot of downtown Calgary and Edmonton rallying, but they don't really discuss anything particularly useful for people to know. It really just becomes people want to get up at the mic and talk for as long as humanly possible, and they're not putting pressure on anyone specific. Where Holding MLAs, especially in Angry Albertan to a lesser extent, they did a lot of initiatives of email your MLA, tell them what you think, tell them how this has affected you. It wasn't saying go tell them that they're scum or something like that. Go call them up and leave them prank phone calls. It was actually trying to make a difference. It was actually doing things that get MLAs scared, because you'll be told, everyone thinks, oh, calling your MLA doesn't make a difference, calling your MP doesn't make a difference, don't write letters, they're not even going to read them. Man, if you ask a politician, if they get 10 letters on something, they will be up late at night with sweating. It is when 10 people are mad enough to send them something about it, they take it seriously. The problem is when people just went downtown Calgary and, you know, they want to make some noise about something. It doesn't matter if 300 people show up or 400, 500 people show up. Those MLAs, because they only got a letter in the last 2 months, they look at that and say, okay, 500 people evenly distributed through the city, maybe 5 of them are in my district. That doesn't make a difference to me. And the thing is, too, that the sort of people who go to those downtown events, and there were some downtown events that were actually useful, not the Artur Pawlowski type solidarity movement events.
That's
that were,
a whole other conversation.
And acting like they were sieging Jericho. But the problem is, although some of those downtown events work, really they ended up just getting taken over by the eccentrics, and it just became a movement for eccentrics. Whereas people who are at home writing letters, they're being respectful, they're saying, I disagree with you, you're not doing a good job, but they're saying it in a sober way. That's what scares a politician, because that's the type of person who's going to volunteer on an opposition campaign. That's the type of person who's might even try and challenge them for their nomination. That might be someone who's actually dangerous, someone who would have donated, but they don't want to show up. But when you're sort of the guy who's wearing an old coat and you seem like the crowd of people who thinks beef jerky is a food group, they don't really, they're not scared. They just think that, oh, okay, those people probably weren't going to vote for me anyways because of some excuse they're going to come up with next week. And that was kind of the problem with the people who led those movements downtown, is that they were people who would have agitated about almost anything, because usually they're like hyper libertarians or something like that. They'll find some excuse where the government's ruining their lives. And I don't like too much government, but usually you get the hyperbole that these people employ is not particularly useful. It's like you guys over at Grace Life Church. The best part of the protest in all of it was when the eccentrics, as I am just now calling them, when they came over and they tried to rip down the fences around Grace Life, and the Grace Life parishioners or congregants came over and put the fences back up and said, please leave. Because I think that made a lot of Albertans realize that these people are actually, they're not going to do anything radical or crazy to get their way, but they're going to take a stand for what they think is right. And I think that was very useful.
Something that's really interesting about that specific event is probably 99% of Grace Life congregation was not actually even at the church that day. So the people who were seeking to put the fence back up, they just knew that we wouldn't be for that action of pulling it down. So it was kind of cool that they just understood that, no, Grace Life wouldn't want you to be doing this.
Well, I assume that those people were probably people who went to similarly minded churches out there, since you guys are, you guys would be a lot like my church, like no one making a lot of noise, very respectful, not quiet in a demure kind of like sad or pathetic way, but just like a quiet strength among people. And quiet strength I find is far more useful than the people who are, and as a sometimes loudmouth myself, being a loudmouth is not always a sign of strength as much as a sign of panicking.
It was a pretty cool event, all said and done. So would you say that groups like the Angry Albertan, like holding MLAs accountable, that they have an overall positive impact or negative or neutral?
I would say it was overall positive. And even though I had a falling out with both groups' leaders, I'd say 85% of the time they were doing the right thing. They were focusing on the right issues. They were taking it from the right perspective. I was working with David Dixon, the former UK police officer who worked with Josh Switzer Crow, the Angry Albertan, in terms of getting the data he got from the AHS about ICU beds in the AHS system. And I would say most of his content was good, but I'd have to whittle it down to the points that worked. Focus on the ICU beds, focus on, even the most liberal pro-lockdown person can agree that when they're underutilizing ICU beds and they're firing nurses who could be helping set up and operate more ICU beds, that's a problem. And that's where I was kind of doing it. So I tended to side away from the vaccine issues because especially in late 2021, I don't know enough, and there's not enough information out there for me to take solid stances on. Not that I was ever pro-mandate, I was always against mandates, but I didn't have enough information to say, vaccines are going to harm you, you shouldn't be able to have to do this, there's adverse effects. Like, I don't know, maybe there are, maybe they're not. You shouldn't still have to do it anyways, and I think that's the steelman argument, that even if this is going to objectively make your life better, you still shouldn't have to do it. I mean, you shouldn't have to do things that are going to make your life better, or it's going to give the government a lot of power. But I was able to take usually a lot of David Dixon's data, which was 90% very good, and filter it down to a piece of content, an article that the average person could understand. Because some of the stuff that David was looking into was extremely high level. It was kind of like, there's the differences between infection rates at like before and after lockdowns would go and whatnot. It would have been like a 5-page essay to be able to explain what this means in medical terms.
Did you send off any freedom of information requests?
Well, I sent a couple FOIP requests, and I immediately actually pretty much after the first one, I stopped. Because after all the media requests, it's mostly media requests we are sending in, because FOIPs, they can push you off for months at a time. But the first freedom of information request, they tried to respond to us, and they basically lied in ways that were so blatant it made it worthless for us to get back to them. And then they made a lot of excuses of why they don't have to tell us certain things. So that's basically was my cue that I'm never going to send the media requests again, because they're obviously not going to deal with me in good faith.
I personally sent one freedom of information request, and it was asking about getting access to whatever kind of documentation or guideline or standards that Dr. Hinshaw and Jason Kenney and all of them were using to make their presentations, because they were so consistent. Every time they had their daily COVID breakdown or whatever, they were very consistent. They were saying certain things and not saying other things. So I figured, well, they have like a set of things like a go, no-go zone kind of dialogue. You are
100% right. Every single department will basically put together some sort of
Media kit.
a crisis messaging kit.
Yeah.
That this is the way we talk about things. These are the bullet points you hit every single time you go out, and these are the only things we're addressing. These are the things that we will admit to, and these are the things we will not admit to.
Yeah.
So you are right, and that's actually an interesting thing to have sent them a FOIP on, because I would actually love to see what the government messaging plan on all that looked like.
Well, according to the FOIP person, there was no such kit. There was no such standard or guidelines. Which
maybe they just made their first presentation. Everything was so copy and pasted after that. That's all. That's what it basically determined everything. Man, I tried to send a FOIP request back in 2020. Had nothing to do with the pandemic.
Mhm.
It was this, I forget which district or ward or whatever it is. Not ward, but it's like some district, some rural Alberta county that we were investigating early into the National Telegraph, because a lot of their band counselors and whatnot, some of them in a singular year were racking up $50,000 in travel expenses and whatnot. And they basically maneuvered it after I sent a FOIP request that I would have had to have them ship me 1,500 pages of documents, because they were effectively going to send me every single piece of paper they had on in the entire district to pretend like that was pertinent to just getting their expense reports in order to basically push me off. And they were going to make me pay 50 cents a page.
Nice.
So they wanted me to pay $750 or no $850 or whatever, $750 for that entire thing. It was so stupid. And I made the guy laugh when I called him up at the Alberta Records department or whatever it was. And I said, so like basically the way that they're going to make me not be able to get this FOIP request through is that they want me to have the entire records transcribed onto walrus tusks.
I would love to see that.
Also, I'll see if I can dig up the emails. It was stupid. And the thing, we have the same sort of abuse in cities as well. We don't have it in the same most blatant way, but man, it's the nonprofit scam. There's so many doors I knocked on in the Alberta election where they were mad at the UCP because they ran a nonprofit that they couldn't explain what the nonprofit did other than it raised a lot of awareness. People who can't explain, if you can't explain what you're doing without saying awareness 5 times a sentence, you should not be doing what you're doing. But you get these people who get nonsensically large grants from from different levels of government. They'll get $600,000 a year, and they do like some sort of education awareness organization that talks about bullying and inclusion. Do they do seminars at schools? Nope. Do they put out new curriculum items? Nope. But they raise a lot of awareness from their basements.
Earlier, you mentioned that you had a bit of a falling out with the leaders of Angry Albertan and holding MLAs accountable. I've met Josh, the Angry Albertan. He came to Grace Life a few times. He seems like a nice guy, but I haven't had any in-depth conversations with him. But I'm a little more familiar with Jordan Kosick. Not that we're good friends or anything. I've talked with him a few times. On a personal level, I do have a lot of respect for guys like Jordan. He, as you mentioned earlier, he kind of offered a megaphone to a lot of Albertans who felt voiceless. Of course, respecting someone doesn't mean automatically agreeing with everything they ever say and do. But I did respect him because he actually did what I hoped to do with the Facebook page that I run. It doesn't matter, but formerly Stuff Kenny Said. And Jordan sought to turn his frustration into something beyond merely yelling into the internet abyss. He encouraged people not just to think, but to desire to do something. And this is what you pointed out earlier, to change the status quo imposed on us by politicians and bureaucrats.
I would say what he was doing was highly practical and highly focused. So the idea that we're going to make sure that everyone every week is going to try and send an email to their MLA to try and get an answer on what's going on. That is highly effective. It's highly professional as well. Because what you want to be doing is, even if it's a grassroots movement where it's just individuals kind of coming together, there's no excuse not to be somewhat professional about how you do things. And I think that overall, I think the way that Josh Switzer and Jordan Kosick and even David Parker with the Take Back Alberta, they are fairly professional. I know David doesn't love me, and I know I don't love him. At the same time, I think he did a decent job in terms of organizing against Jason Kenney and then organizing people against lockdowns and then organizing people for nomination campaigns. I don't always agree with the candidates he's backing or the motivations to go after Kenney, because even though I don't think Kenney was doing a good job, I also thought there was a little bit of dishonesty with the way that some people talked about getting rid of Kenney and the reasons to get rid of Kenney. But all of these groups, I found that they grew up from what a lot of the people who wanted to go downtown and make some noise were doing. Because I feel like that's the most egotistical thing you can do. Gather up 600 people to cheer for you while you talk about nonsense.
I did notice that when, as you mentioned, the falling out, Jordan seemed to get fairly upset with you after you leveled some criticism against Danielle Smith.
Do you know when I got kicked out of that group?
Why is that?
It's because I started trying to organize to get some signatures for John Horsman.
He was the bank guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's actually a really decent man too. He would have been a good fiscal conservative kind of a candidate if you were looking for someone who's maybe he was like the more fiscal version of Travis Taves, or Travis Taves is the more social version of the same guy. Like not a bad candidate, but I think the group ended up becoming very much the Danielle Smith show, and that's what kind of undermined it a little bit. I'm not sure how healthy the group is these days, but once it starts becoming an activist group on behalf of one candidate, then criticism and dissenting opinions and organizing to hold MLAs accountable falls to the wayside, because we're no longer holding people accountable. We are saying that this person is the one.
It's a lot quieter these days, and I actually think Jordan has kind of stepped back or stepped away from using social media at all right now. So that's kind of interesting. If you had to, could you steelman a case for understanding why Jordan might have had good reasons to be upset with your criticisms?
I don't even remember exactly my criticism entirely, because it was more so my contrary opinions on politics to him that got me kicked out, less arguing with him. But it was he was mad at me because he had the idea that I'm out to get Danielle Smith, because I literally did say that to him on the phone, that I want to make sure that Danielle Smith does not become the premier. So I'll never not own up to that. But it's like he's acting like it's because I have this nefarious intention that this random lady who I have nothing against should just not become premier. Had nothing to do with that. I'm a social conservative. I am a person who's fairly hawkish on fiscal issues and stuff like that. And from looking at her record as Wild Rose leader, looking at her actions when she's a radio host, as well as the sort of things she did during the lockdowns and whatnot, I thought her story about who she was when she was running for the leader kind of strained credulity a bit. I didn't think that she was exactly who she said she was, which is why there was a lot of NDP people working on her campaign, why her restaurant, before she just recently sold it, was very much like she literally enforced the lockdown measures fairly tightly on her restaurant the entire time it was open, and only took them down when the province took them down. At the same time, she was encouraging other people to break them. I'm fine with people following the lockdown measures. Some people just have to. Your business is in a tough spot. You really do not have the time to go to war with the government. Fair enough. There was just there was factors here and there that demonstrated that she's not libertarian socially. She's socially left-wing, which is why she doesn't just say people can believe what they want. She'll condemn people for being socially conservative, or she'll basically mock people, or she'll vote for things that very far left organizations were pushing for and whatnot, like she did back when she was a Wild Rose leader. So that's why I didn't like her. But Jordan, maybe he just got the wrong impression from me. So when I'm saying that I'd basically like someone like Brian Jean or Travis Taves or even Rebecca Schultz or Todd Lowen, any of these people to win instead of Danielle, the only person I didn't want to win was Leela Ahir or
she was brutal.
Yeah, like those people were not even, to be fair, they weren't even running to win. Or Ken Bosencool, I guess, convinced Rajan she could win, but that's neither here nor there at this point. I doubt she knew. I think she knew she wasn't going to win 2 weeks into her campaign launching. But I wanted any of those people to win, because again, even if those people are on paper, even to Danielle Smith's left, I thought in reality Danielle Smith is to all of their left, but just isn't honest about it. Not that she's like, oh, she's no different from Rachel Notley. Not at all. There's a reason why I came to help the UCP a lot during the election, a lot of anti-NDP PACs. It's because the NDP still need to be defeated. But I think that when Danielle Smith was elected as premier, I was proven right when she immediately started apologizing to for a bunch of stuff to the media. She talked tough. I'm not apologizing for anything. I'm a tough radio show host. And then like 3 days later, she's like, I am unreservedly sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Like, I'm decently pro-Ukraine. At the same time, if she's going to make a little bit more of the we shouldn't be supporting them because there's political corruption in Ukraine kind of arguments, which are legitimate, it's like, just don't apologize. Just own your position. I know there's a lot of Ukrainians in Alberta, but I think it just only hurts you to apologize for something that's not apologize worthy. If you've truly done something terrible to someone, like you hit their dog with a car, yes, apologize.
Yeah.
But like if it's just someone, if the media is basically grilling you because a guy like recently, if a guy stands next to you in a certain t-shirt, a straight pride shirt, you don't apologize. Who cares? I think that people who will go to events wearing eccentric t-shirts are annoying, regardless of what the t-shirt says.
Right.
But don't apologize. Just say, I didn't know. Or I saw it and I was just going to take the photo because there's no point in having a fight with someone at a pancake breakfast.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Polyev apologized after her. I don't think Polyev was actually going to say anything. I think he was forced to say something because the premier, who's supposedly very right-wing, apologized.
Right.
So if he didn't then apologize, they're going to be like, oh, he's further right than Danielle Smith.
Right.
And so I think he got backed into the corner because you'll notice Jasraj Halan never apologized for the Leave Our Kids Alone photo, like that photo with Mahmoud Mora from Leave Our Kids Alone in Calgary. He leads YYC Muslims. Raj never apologized because it's a unique situation. The premier of the province didn't already preempt you into basically having to apologize to, so he just ignored the media. Because what are they going to do? The story immediately evaporated as soon as Raj said nothing, and I think that Polyev was going to be ready to say nothing.
Sometimes that's the best thing a politician can do, is just shut up.
Just say nothing. Like if it's a big deal, the story will continue. If it's not a big deal, it'll fizzle out in a week. They don't own your time. You're a politician who has a lot. And when I'm saying this, I'm saying it in terms of the narrative you're supposed to spin. I'm a politician. I have a lot of like very critical stuff I'm working on. I do not have time to get back to you. So just use that as an excuse to wait 2 weeks and reevaluate if you actually did anything wrong later. Always apologize also way later, because only the people who care about the apology will notice. Whereas everyone else who didn't need to know that you apologize for something don't need to be aware. That sounds weird, but you know what I mean. Like,
no, actually, that makes a lot of sense, because
it's actually an interpersonal thing in churches that if someone comes to you with a grievance, they come to you directly. You apologize. They don't march you up onto like some dais and you have to declare to the church that you're very apologetic to another member. It's just not how it works. You get a couple of rounds of people asking you for your apology directly, and if the situation resolves there, nobody needs to know about it. And that's where the media is unfair, because they want everyone to know that you apologized for something, regardless if it's apology worthy. So it's your duty to make sure as few people know that you apologized as possible, because it's not their right to know.
In case anyone who might be listening to this is interested, he's talking about Matthew chapter 18.
That would have actually been so funny for Danielle and Pierre to do. And again, Danielle would have had to do this and set the tone right, because she was the one they were targeting on this issue. If they wanted an apology, you're like, oh, okay, who am I apologizing to first? And they're like, if they said, oh, the LGBTQ community who's very upset, you're like, okay, which ones? And like, can I find the guy I need to apologize to? Because and this is on every issue, if you need me to apologize for something I supposedly did wrong because some guy wore a t-shirt or whatever the silly thing is that something happened to, find me the person who's specifically personally upset, not upset because some abstract group of people might be also upset, because people get upset on behalf of other people all the time these days. It's truly pathetic. But just challenge the media. Just ask them basic questions. The people will start mocking the media if you just start asking them basic questions about their outrage. It's like, oh, okay. Well, what do you want me to apologize about? Oh, okay, that. Well, who's upset about it? Oh, these people. Those people specifically who? If they come to my office, I'll take a photo with them and shake their hand and apologize unreservedly. They're never going to do that, because nobody's that pathetic to show up to your office to get the apology over something that petty.
Speaking of apologies, I'm just kidding.
It's or are you going to apologize to me?
No, well, I probably should have taken quite a bit of your time, but maybe I'll boil it down to two final questions, if that works for you. Setting aside all the criticisms that you had regarding Danielle Smith prior to her winning the provincial election, not setting them aside in the sense of pretending they don't exist, because that's illogical. It doesn't make sense. But just setting them aside for a second. Has she done anything since she became the leader of the UCP that has left you feeling pleasantly surprised?
The suspending the gas tax, that was a good move. I think I liked that. I did like. I'm never going to take away from her that her proposing a tax cut during the election is still not a good move. It just makes me frustrated when it comes late. I did like the cracking down on crime. The adding sheriffs to the city of Calgary was a good move. I think she truly not just outmaneuvered Rachel Notley on that, but outmaneuvered Jody Gondek, who would have been fully satisfied to basically sort of silently sit off in the corner and ignore Danielle Smith. But Danielle Smith basically forced Gondek to play nice with her by just doing every single thing that the city of Calgary's councillors wanted. So like, you know, more police officers. When I say the city councilors, I mean like the majority of council wants to pass, but they know Gondek would never go for it, as well as the constituents of Calgary. So she was doing that. That's probably what the arena deal was part of, was trying to kind of club people like Jody Gondek into being less smarmy to Danielle by forcing her to like have to show up to events for for announcements and stuff like that. Those were smart moves. The endorsement of the involuntary rehab was a good idea. I think Marshall Smith's done a really good job on that, even though I don't always agree with Marshall Smith on a lot of stuff, her chief of staff.
The last question, it's I'm going to cheat. It's a 2-part question. If you had
one of the second part of the second part's going to turn into 4 parts, and then it's just going down.
Yeah. If you had an opportunity to speak directly to groups like Angry Albertan, Holding MLAs Accountable, Taking Back Alberta, any of those groups, if you could speak directly to them to give them advice, and they were, for whatever reason, hypothetically, they were guaranteed to actually listen to you and hear you out, what would you say to them? Like, how would you encourage them to keep going, or to change, or to whatever?
I think that they need an issue to rally around. They need a focusing issue. The problem with a lot of these, the thing is that COVID felt like a very general issue in the sense that pretty much it was affecting everyone's lives day to day, and it was pretty much the only thing people cared about. So it was easy to get people involved in something like that. I think these groups now need to find a couple of issues that they suspect that the UCP government might go soft on, and that needs to be their big issue for the next year, and you got to really press some of them. This is where YYC Muslims in that sort of smaller religious communities able to be very effective, because it's all become about parental rights and trying to shift education away from social issues and left-wing political messaging back to reading and writing and arithmetic. That's where they're very successful, and where the Angry Albertan and where Holding MLAs Accountable could become stale is if it starts becoming about nothing in particular. This is where the Wexit groups on Facebook sort of died away, in the Freedom Convoy groups, which some of them have hundreds of thousands of members. It's because they just became generic conservative pages. They didn't have any particular issues that they focused on. The rules around what you could post got very loose, or they got way too tight and they stopped posting about anything, or the people running the pages started just making it a pet project of whatever they wanted to talk about that day. So you got a lot of these pages that even just became PPC groups, because all the PPC people moved in and sort of demanded that they fight against the globalist conservatives, stuff like that. And it just became stale because you know it's just because someone's blog, but it's not advertised that way. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to go to the National Telegraph's page and see what's new. It's just like, I'm going to go to Freedom Truckers and then see whatever this person who runs that's obsessed with now.
So the second part of that question, same context, if you could speak and they were guaranteed to actually hear you out and take what you said seriously, even if they ultimately disagree, what would you say if you could speak directly to guys like Jordan Cossack?
I'd sing him a song. No,
really?
I don't know. I don't have anything against them, so I guess just like, I don't know. Like, maybe rephrase. Can you rephrase that, or like to say it again, because I think I missed a word there.
Similar to the context of the last question, if you had a moment to speak directly to Jordan, and it was somehow guaranteed hypothetically that he would listen to you with the desire to actually hear you out, what would you say? Given the history and all of that.
This is where I'm a deeply socially awkward person. I don't know. I just sit in the other end of the room and drink coffee or something like that, like I usually do with people. It's not that I won't talk to the person. I just don't really approach people in this sort of manner. I have nothing against them. I guess that's what I would say. Nothing. Whenever someone I suspect has a problem with me, I just talk to them as if there's no problem.
Lastly, where can people find you? Where can they get in touch with you? All these things.
Well, these days they can get in touch with me in less and less places because of Bill C-18, which I suspect we'll talk about next time. But they can find me on Twitter at Wyatt_Claypool, all lowercase. They can still find the National Telegraph Facebook page just by, searching the National Telegraph. We're still going to be doing a lot of video content, whatnot. And of course, we have Telegram pages, which we usually link through either our pinned posts on our Twitter account or through the Facebook page, where we provide links every once in a while. But other than that, that's pretty pretty much where I'm at. People can go and sign up for our email list or directly on the National Telegraph website. I think that's the first article they read after every 2 weeks or so. It'll give them a prompt to sign up for our emails, and I think that's a great way of actually staying in touch with your favorite creators. Mm-hmm. I do it with a lot of the people I watch now. I make sure I actually get their emails just so I never lose track of where they're at. Especially, I'd say if I was to endorse one person everyone should read, who I think does a lot of what the National Telegraph does, but more from the commentary side of things. That's all commentary for the most part, is Spencer Fernando. SpencerFernando.com is a fantastic website. He's really good at talking about politics in a practical sense. I even subscribe to his Patreon and pay him $20 a month just to get
Nice.
his political analysis posts.
Thank you very much for your time.
That was a weird plug I did for someone completely separate from me. I basically subtly implied you should give him money like I am.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go to his website and you like it, maybe you should.
Yeah, you should.
Cool. Oh yeah, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we can go over the other 2,600 questions that I had written down another time.